Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 76, Brawl in the Arches. The party is in the elemental plane of fire, about to face two devils, a pit fiend and an Arañez, so they can be rewarded with the last vestige of divergence, a set of armor for Pike. And buckle up, because this fight is going to be a doozy. Before we get started, a quick announcement. I'm doing a live stream next week for my Patreon subscribers and my YouTube channel members. It's going to be next Tuesday, June 10th at 2 p.m. Pacific, as I'm trying to get back up to speed in all my content. Part of that also means getting back to doing Patreon rewards, so keep your eyes peeled for some more cool stuff on the Patreon, which I'll announce on this channel. But Patreon members or channel members who support me at $3 a month will get to participate in this upcoming live stream. And I've got some other live streams planned for the next month or two, but the Patreon stream has been long overdue, so they've got dibs on my first stream back. So if that interests you, scroll down and check out the Patreon and join the live stream on Tuesday. Thanks so much, and now, on with the show. Ashley is Skyping in for this game, but she's not home yet when the session starts, so she's going to join a little bit late. Now we're going to jump into the fight in just a minute, but first I want to bring your attention to a little detail from the pre-theme song part of the show when they're doing their ad reads and their announcements. At some point during this part of the episode, the cast is joking about the reactions they have when they recognize their merch out in the world, and Liam and Matt both do an impression of Donald Sutherland's iconic point and shout from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Keep this moment in mind because when we get to the next episode, it's going to wind up being revisited in an unexpected way. But then the game actually starts and Matt reveals the battlefield. Matt has essentially constructed a whole corner of a city block to serve as the encounter terrain. And the first thing that happens is Matt starts answering the cast's questions, clarifying where each of them actually is and what's around them. Now, this is not the most dramatic way to start a session. Obviously the cast is riveted because they are very invested in this fight and very stressed about not dying, and it obviously helps that the map itself is excellent and very well constructed and dynamic and exciting to look at. And if none of that was the case, then I could see this being an interaction that really kills the momentum of the session rather than building it up by jumping right into the action. It's a similar critique that some people have about starting games by rolling for initiative, because they argue that the act of rolling initiative, especially at the beginning of a session, is just not the most dramatic way to start a game, because what should be an exciting moment gets bogged down in bookkeeping instead. Now, that generally hasn't been my experience when starting games with initiative, but I respect that that's how some people feel about it, and I get that. Obviously, this game is about to start with a roll for initiative. Lots of Critical Role sessions start with initiative rolls. And because I've gotten pretty good at ending my sessions on cliffhangers, a lot of my games also start the same way. But I don't think you're wrong if your experience has taught you that rolling for initiative at the start of a session isn't so much a cool, dramatic first moment as it is a necessary slog you need to get through to get to the exciting fight. And a few other things help with that as well, like how Matt opens the session by recapping the previous game and dropping them back into the scene, which helps the players feel more invested in the outcome of this fight because they remember the stakes of it. And then Matt switches on the battle music as they roll for initiative, so the act of rolling initiative doesn't feel as slow. It feels tense and exciting because the battle music has started. However, I can still understand why some people think initiative slows down a session, and that's fair. And I do think that the same could be said for a moment like this. Starting by just showing them the map and answering their questions and making sure everyone is on the same page is not exactly the most dramatic thing. But it is absolutely necessary. It is the best way to make sure you're not going to be dealing with any questions or confusion in the middle of the fight, where not only will those miscommunications threaten to kill the momentum during a much more pivotal moment, but where any misunderstandings could actually harm the player's experience at the table because their strategy was built off of a flawed understanding of the terrain. Starting a combat-heavy session by giving your players a tour of the map is like an investment at the beginning of the game to make sure you don't need to waste more time later in the game. I've definitely been critical, no pun intended, of some of the communication problems that have come up in the previous episodes of the show. So anytime Matt stops everything to make sure everybody is on the same page right at the top of the game, that automatically makes me very happy. So let's go through the information our players received at the top of the episode. There are a lot of different sized buildings around them. There are no city guards anywhere in sight, at least so far, and there's a river of lava running through the battlefield in a constructed channel as part of the city's actual infrastructure. And this is just such an excellent map, especially for this encounter. The buildings all have different heights, which provides different levels of elevation, which is helpful for the party because both of their opponents can fly. It will give the players a way to get closer to their flying enemies. But these buildings also obstruct views from different angles, which, as we'll see throughout the fight, is going to turn out to be kind of a huge hindrance for the party because they can't just sit in one spot and keep firing arrows at all the targets flying around them, like Hawkeye in the first Avengers movie. If an enemy moves out of their line of sight, the player is going to have to move to get into a new position, which is actually really good for the game itself because having obstructed views from certain angles is going to encourage more movement during the fight and make the encounter more dynamic. You also have the River of Lava, which restricts or maybe just complicates movement around the battlefield, because if you want to get across that part of the street, you're going to have to jump. but it also provides a hazard that the players could potentially use to their advantage. Except ordinarily, this would be the perfect place to shove the enemies to try to light them on fire, but these are devils from hell who are hanging out in the plane of fire, so I suspect the party realizes that they won't be able to do a lot of fire damage to these foes. And that doesn't even account for the fact that it's going to be very hard to shove these enemies into the lava when both of them can fly. However, the party is already very familiar with the idea that if they can use a piece of terrain strategically, so can the enemies. So when they see this river of lava, it should get them thinking about the possibility that their enemies are going to try to shove them into the lava. These channels of lava were also already established when Matt described the city in the last episode, so he knew that if they actually got into an encounter in the streets of the city, a river of lava was almost certainly going to be a part of it. And this helps give this encounter a very distinct identity. This is not the first or the last battlefield in Critical Role with lava as an active terrain feature on the board. But this is the first time the lava has been such a deliberate part of the construction of the battlefield on the part of the city builders within the world of the game. Even way back when they fought the Duergar in the Emberhold, there was lava flowing around the fortress and across the top of the fortress, and Keyleth famously used the lava for one of her most brutal kills in the game, but it wasn't really integrated into the design of the structure itself, not internally. When the Duergar Queen dropped a river of lava into the middle of a combat, she was only able to do so by disintegrating the ceiling and releasing the lava that was above them. In this case, the canal is literally built into the city streets itself. And in reality, that's not actually any different than a random pool of lava near the portal to the fire plane back in episode 46, or hypothetically, a river of lava that you might find in the lair of an ancient red dragon that we're going to go fight soon. In all those cases, Matt still puts the river of lava there. It doesn't just happen organically. But with this example, this design is actually going to present a very unique visual that your players are going to remember, and that can also be really valuable. So I have nothing but praise for this battle map. As we're going to see throughout the rest of the episode, the design of this map is going to be a major feature in what makes this fight so exciting. And I also want to say, I am not an expert in map design. It's something I've always struggled with, but I know I also got a lot worse about it over the past 5 years when I've been mainly running my games virtually. But between the fact that I'm starting to run another in-person game for the first time in years, and the fact that I'm just hitting the point in this series where a lot of Matt's maps are getting a lot better, it's something that I'm trying to think about a lot more so that I can make my encounters more dynamic. However, I also have to give a shout out to my fellow Critical Role YouTuber, Megaphone Man. He's watching through Critical Role for the very first time, live on stream, and he has much more strongly developed and better thought out opinions about map design than I do. I'll include a link to some of his more map-focused videos and streams in the description below. But now that we've talked about the map, it's time for the party to roll for initiative. Ashley's not home yet, so Laura rolls her initiative for her, and is ready to run the character up until the point where Ashley's able to join the stream. And it's initiative, so let's hit the highlights of this fight. Vex tries to use a bramble shot on the Pit Fiend. This is a special arrow Fenthras gives her that allows her to wrap up an opponent in vines. But the Pit Fiend makes a save, so he's not restrained. But then Grog grapples him, and Keyleth traps the Erinyes in a watery sphere. So right off the bat, we can see that Vox Machina has a very clear strategy. Restrain the villains so they can't fly away. However, on each of their turns, both of the devils manage to break their grapples and fly into the air. Breaking their grapples takes them each their entire turns, but it's worth it because it's more important for them to gain some mobility now, rather than getting pinned down at the beginning of the combat. The Erinyes flies on top of one of the buildings, out of line of sight for the party, but the Pit Fiend only flies just above the heads of our heroes, because he has a fear aura that radiates out from him. At the top of the round, when we come back to the characters he's the closest to, they have to start making wisdom saving throws against his aura of fear. He doesn't need to get that far away from them. He only needed to get off the ground so he could be out of reach of the barbarian and the bear. The fear aura actually keeps him relatively close to the party, which means he's not repeating the exact same tactics as Umbrasyl, flying really high above them and devastating them from the sky. And this is really important for this fight because that is essentially what the Erinyes is doing. She's doing it from behind cover, but the core idea is basically the same. And it's absolutely fine for one of your villains in your encounter to do this. But if they were both doing it, then this encounter would start to feel a lot less fun. Sure, Matt is basically just running the Pit Fiend exactly as designed, but I still want to give him some credit for that. This demonstrates the value of choosing monsters that can be deployed using different tactics specific to their stat block. And it also just highlights the value of really reading the stat block in advance and internalizing how the monster's abilities will shape their strategy in combat. I talked about that a bit in a video last year when I reviewed Keith Amon's book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and I also talked about it a bit in my Rust Monster video that I just put out last week, where in that one I actually should have reviewed the stat block more carefully before dropping a monster on my game. Of course, comparing Rust Monsters and Pit Fiends is a bit like comparing a throwing knife to a bazooka, and that's very clearly illustrated when Keyleth provokes an opportunity attack from the Pit Fiend, who hits her with his mace and deals 18 bludgeoning damage and 29 fire damage. I'm not going to spell out the damage in every turn, but this should help give you a sense of what kind of damage he's dealing with. This is kind of the downside of opportunity attacks. They discourage movement in combat, which works against the goal of an encounter like this. That's something I've been really feeling the friction of in my own games. I've been starting to feel the temptation to remove opportunity attacks entirely from my group of new players. But that would actually be surprisingly difficult to do because most of them are avid players of Baldur's Gate 3, so they actually know the rules for opportunity attacks really well. As I'm sure a lot of you have experienced yourselves, when you're running a game for new players, I'm extremely reluctant to throw out one of the very few rules the party already pretty well understands. But fortunately, in the second round of combat, Vox Machina starts really taking advantage of the space. Grog leaps into the air to get high enough to attack the Erinyes before landing back on the street, and Vax uses his wings and his boots of haste to fly all over the battlefield. However, the Pit Fiend fights him in midair, and it turns out the Pit Fiend has 4 attacks. His mace is his nastiest weapon, but he swings with that last, and Liam doesn't want to risk wasting his uncanny dodge on an attack that won't land. So pretty much in any fight, on any given round, the first time Vax gets hit, he's going to use his uncanny dodge on whatever the first attack is, no matter how much more dangerous the later attacks might be. And it turns out in this case he was right. The mace misses at the end of the turn. But before that happens, the Pit Fiend lands a natural 20 with his tail. Thankfully for Vax, he's able to use a luck point to make the Fiend re-roll that attack. Unfortunately, the reroll is also a natural 20. I don't know about you, but when an enemy attacking me rolls 2 natural 20s on the same attack, at that point, I just suck it up, you know? Like, okay, they've earned it. And obviously it would have been nice if Liam had known that was coming, so he could have saved his uncanny dodge for the natural 20 rather than using it on the first attack. But this is one of my favorite things about Liam as a player. He doesn't spend a lot of time second-guessing anyone's strategic decisions. He sometimes questions Matt's rulings. He's not above digging his heels in and making his case for what he hoped would happen. But in the middle of the battle, he knows that he's doing the best he can with whatever information he has available. And so he doesn't lose a lot of sleep over a moment like this, where he could have hypothetically saved a resource in case he needed it. There are other players at the table who will urge Liam to think a little bit more strategically about saving something like an uncanny dodge for one of the bigger attacks. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that philosophy. But the reason Liam doesn't get analysis paralysis in combat is because he knows what works for him. He's got a really high armor class, especially when he's hasted, so it just doesn't make a lot of sense for him to wait for attacks that might land at some point down the road. And then even in a moment like this, where it would have been really nice for him to have uncanny dodge later in the round, he doesn't second guess the decision he made because he didn't realize that the villain was going to land the 1 in 400 chance of rolling 2 natural 20s. And the reason I also want to highlight this is because this mindset doesn't just mean Liam is kind to himself. It also means he doesn't spend a lot of time second-guessing the strategic choices made by other player characters. I talked about that before on this channel and how one of his catchphrases whenever a battle goes wrong is to say, "Fog of war." It's his way of saying, they made the best choice they could in the moment, let's not dwell on the mistakes. But this episode made me realize that I think that mindset comes from the same place as this uncanny dodge moment does. He's figured out the strategy that makes the most sense for when to deploy some of his abilities, and if it turns out that sometimes the fight goes in a way he didn't expect, then, oh well, that's life. Of course, after the Pit Fiend took his attacks, he flies off to find some cover. And now we're starting to run into a problem. The players on the ground can't see the bad guys, and the players who are hiding in the mansion especially can't see, well, hardly anything that's going on in the battle. And Matt is very clear about this, but it's going to present a big problem for the players in just a minute. But first, Vex cuts on a broom and flies in the air and shoots at the Pit Fiend, and Grog slams his knuckles together and enlarges himself, and then uses his boots of Pharaoh leaping to jump to the building and climb onto the roof with the Erinyes, where he unloads some attacks on her. Scanlan floats himself in the air with Bigby's hand, and he and Keyleth prepare to cast spells once the Pit Fiend comes back within range. Percy takes cover behind a fountain, and Vax zips all over the map. They're really moving this round. Then the Pit Fiend comes in to attack Scanlan and Vex since they're both flying in the air. Keyleth and Scanlan cast their spells, Sunbeam and Odaluk's Resilient Sphere, respectively. But the Pit Fiend has advantage on saves against magic, so he resists the damage from Sunbeam and does not get trapped in a sphere. But before he can attack Vex and Scanlan falls out of the air, because Sam points out that the sphere was a concentration spell, and so was Bigby's hand. It was worth the risk to try to get close enough to the Pit Fiend to trap him, but he knew that whether or not the spell succeeded, just the act of casting it meant he was going to fall. However, this fall has some pretty big consequences. First of all, he winds up landing right next to the lava, so he not only takes some bludgeoning damage, but also some heat damage from the proximity. And the proximity damage is a really good detail from Matt. Not only does it reflect lava in the real world, where getting close to it is pretty dangerous, but it also reframes this moment as not just a near miss, but instead as a warning. Scanlan didn't avoid the lava. He still got singed. He just avoided the worst of the lava. So that proximity damage should serve as an indicator that the players need to be careful not even to get too close to the lava. However, the other consequence of Scanlan failing is that now the Pit Fiend doesn't need to split his attack between 2 targets. So he unloads 4 attacks into Vex. Now at first, Laura asks if Scanlan can use cutting words to help out, and Sam jokes that he's too disoriented from the fall to help out. But then as Matt keeps rolling attacks and rolling damage and they realize how bad this is about to be, Sam does ask Matt if Scanlan is aware enough of his surroundings to try to help by casting Cutting Words. And Matt says that he does not have the ability to do so. Now, first of all, in this specific example, none of the players have made the connection that Scanlan already used his reaction to cast the prepared spell, so they kind of got the right answer through the wrong math. But let's set that aside, because personally, I'm not wild about the ruling that Scanlan can't perceive that Vex is getting obliterated 20 feet above him. I understand where Matt is coming from. Falling out of the sky and hitting the pavement would be disorienting. And this isn't even the first time Matt has used that argument to say that somebody who just took a bunch of damage from a fall can't help out with one of their allies with a reaction ability. In fact, I think Sam knew this is how Matt might rule, which is why he didn't ask until the situation got serious enough that he felt like he had to. And that's good behavior from Sam. He doesn't push the issue, but because there's no specific rule that tells him that his character is disoriented in the moment, he politely does ask the question, but he's prepared to get the answer no. But my problem with this moment is specifically the fact that there is no rule about falling from a great height and how that makes you disoriented. Not to be the guy who says there's nothing in the rules that says a dog can't play basketball, but there is no rule for how falling damage makes you unable to take reactions. Now that does not mean that you can't invent a rule at your table, and I'll definitely say that we have a precedent on the show that Matt wants falling to feel like a bigger deal. Throughout this campaign, whenever a player character tries to cast a spell while falling, Matt usually asks for a concentration check to see if they can get the spell off. From what I understand, that seems to be a rule he's been using ever since they played Pathfinder. I don't know if it's a house rule or a standard rule of Pathfinder 1st edition. My problem with Matt's rulings on this issue is just the fact that he doesn't seem to have a clear rule about it. There's no obvious rule I've seen for how far you need to fall before you become disoriented, or whether it's impacted by the specific surface you hit. No pun intended. And Matt obviously is not imposing any real condition from the game, like stunned. He's just sometimes denying players the opportunity to take reactions. Now, this is a very story-focused campaign, and so Matt sometimes has imposed these restrictions for reasons, and that doesn't bother me as much. For example, when Grog accidentally stabbed Pike, Matt determined that this was shocking enough that it kept Grog from being able to contribute to the riddle by spelling out the letters he saw. It's not my favorite ruling ever, but it did help sell a moment that did need to be treated as a serious emotional moment, and I do sometimes think the mechanics take a backseat to the narrative. At least that's how I run my games. That's definitely how Matt runs his games. I'm sure different tables will draw that line in different places, but I personally think your cursed weapon plunged through your best friend and drank her blood is probably a pretty reasonable moment for Matt to step in and suspend the mechanics in favor of the narrative. However, in this case, there is really no major narrative significance to Scanlan not being able to react. The narrative moment here is just Scanlan fall down hard. And in situations like that, the advantage of a game like D&D is that the mechanics specifically exist to help adjudicate what is going to happen next. So my personal feeling is that if it's that important to Matt that the characters shouldn't be able to take reactions after they hit the ground from falling, then he just needs to make a rule for it and specifically spell it out so everyone is on the same page. Because even though Sam kind of knew how Matt was going to rule, it doesn't seem like all the cast members know the details of Matt's rule or have a clear one in mind. Matt's just coming up with judgments on the fly, but I think he should formalize them. And besides, in this fight especially, the players are already grappling with limited line of sight, so I don't think Matt needs to impose further restrictions on what keeps them from seeing the distress their fellow characters are in. So because there's no specific rule Matt can point to, it makes this ruling feel just a little bit more strict than it needs to. Again, in this case, it didn't really matter because Scanlan had already spent his reaction, but I still think it's useful to talk about this, because I think it needs to be a formal rule in your tables if this is something you feel strongly about, or if it's not this specifically, an example like this. So, Vex takes a whole bunch of damage, including poison damage from the Pit Fiend's bite. It's all enough to knock her unconscious, so she falls and loses a death saving throw when she hits the ground. But of course, there's a chance it could have been even worse. She could have fallen in the lava, but Matt rolled a scatter die to see where on the board she was going to land. Thankfully, she landed next to Pike, and landing next to the cleric is kind of the best case scenario, actually. The Erinez flies away from Grog, taking an attack of opportunity, and shoots 3 times at Keyleth, hitting her with poisoned arrows. This is another reason there's so much movement in the fight. The bad guys are not letting themselves get locked down in one place. Even though the Erinez is obviously going to take a bunch of damage by trying to escape the Barbarian, she still lets that happen because it's more valuable for her to go after other opponents who aren't just huge sacks of hit points. And then she's able to find a new place to duck down for cover. And speaking of movement, obviously Pike is in the perfect position to heal Vex, but she actually moves into the center of the street and casts Mass Cure Wounds, healing Keyleth, Vex, and Scanlan. Matt actually makes a mistake here, which he corrects the next time it applies to another victim of the Pit Fiend, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But at this point, at the end of round 3, an Afridi, one of the Illuminated, rounds the corner and sees the fight and starts heading towards the battlefield. The entire reason they planned to pull out the Pit Fiend into the mansion for the fight was to avoid the possibility of the town guards wandering into the combat. So this is basically the worst case scenario, because Once one town guard has entered the arena, it's just a matter of time before others start getting involved as well.
The longer you run from the police, the more certain you are to get caught. There's a small window of time after a chase begins before backup arrives, before helicopters are deployed. If you want any chance of getting away, you'd best use this time to find someplace secluded.
Here.
And bail out.
But this also had to happen eventually. Like I said, the reason they formed the plan they did was because they were aware that the Illuminated were a concern they needed to deal with. And if that's the case, then you can't sideline them. You can wait a couple of rounds like Matt did, but in order to honor the circumstances the party has found themselves in, you do have to eventually break the seal and start bringing town guards into the fray. You spelled out the risks for getting in a public fight, and now they're in a public fight, so you have to make good on that threat. At the top of her turn, Vex spends an action casting protection from poison on herself to remove the poison condition. But she also asks Matt if she can do something quick, and he says, sure. And so she tosses a bag of gems at the feet of the Illuminated and says, we're more than we look, we need your help. She's essentially trying to bribe him. She rolls a 21 persuasion check, but Matt gives no indication that this worked or not. By the way, this was Plan C. Plan A was to get the Pit Fiend into the mansion, and Plan C was to bribe the Illuminated to help kill the Pit Fiend. So it seems like so far, we're going according to plan? No, that's absolutely not true. Things are going very bad. Anyway, she ducks into the mansion to find a safe place to hide. Keyleth blasts the Pit Fiend with her Sunbeam again, and then she transforms into an air elemental and closes the distance on the Arañas. Again, movement. I love it. However, at this point, Matt realizes he has not been asking for concentration checks from the party. So Vax and Keyleth both make a few retroactive checks, and Keyleth barely passes her second check. Now, I know that because I can scroll back through the video and check the math. They're just going off of memory. But for her third check, it's right on the borderline. It's above a 10, but it's not super high. But Matt can't remember how much damage she took from the third attack, since it was a couple of turns ago now. And Marisha only wrote down the total damage rather than writing down each entry separately. So Matt just waves his hand and says, basically, it's all fine. She got above a 10 on all her checks, and he should have remembered to have her roll on the moment that she first got hit. So he's just going to use the minimum concentration check DC of 10, rather than try to work backwards and relitigate whether she got hit for more than 26 damage on any of those individual hits. And I'm a big fan of that ruling. Matt is being a bit of a hard ass in this fight, justifiably I think, but it's still a lot of tough rulings. But I also think this was definitely the right move here. When you need to go back and retroactively roll concentration checks you missed, but you don't remember exactly how much damage everyone took and you're not using average damage, then you can just sit there and rack your brain, or you could just stick with the minimum DCs, get through it as quickly as possible, and let this serve as a reminder for next time that you and your players need to remember concentration checks in the future. Well done to Matt for just pushing through this and getting it over with as quickly as possible so they can get back into the fight. Grog jumps off the building and attacks the Pit Fiend as he flies through the air. But the Pit Fiend is gloating now that the Illuminated showed up, this fight is basically over. Grog wants to use the Chain of Returning to swing down off the Pit Fiend and down to the ground, like Indiana Jones. Movement. Just the fact that this fight has so much verticality has prompted the players to move around a lot. Unfortunately, Travis rolls a 9 and Grog lands in the lava. And look at that, this map is getting a lot of use out of its various elements, so I'm still going to count this as a win. And this is where we discover that Matt has finally found the suggested rules for lava damage in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which he had not used either of the previous times they'd been submerged in lava in episode 7 or episode 46. This time, Matt is going to be rolling a lot more damage dice than he has in the past. And at first he explains that because they're in the elemental plane of fire, this lava is going to be different from what they've encountered before. And I really like that explanation. It tells the players that they're about to receive a lot more damage for this lava, but then offers a narrative justification. This is great. But then he says these are the real rules for lava, and that's basically his way of signaling that these are going to be the rules for lava going forward. Maybe that's not how you take it, but because I've seen other fights in the future where lava plays a role, I can confirm that that is what Matt meant. Obviously, this somewhat undercuts his first point that this lava is going to be a lot more dangerous because they're in the plane of fire. Because now that's not the reason why. Lava is just more dangerous now because Matt has figured out that there are suggested rules for how much damage the lava should deal, which is also fine. Part of getting comfortable with the new system means realizing that some of your improvisational rulings from previous sessions aren't really compatible with the intended gameplay, so you start folding in more of the official rules and rulings and even the suggestions because they are going to lead to a more cohesive experience at the table. And sometimes the rules of the world change because you are using new rules. For example, when they first started their game, they were in 4th edition, then they switched to Pathfinder, and they switched to 5th edition. And with each of those changes, the way things damaged you in the world changed. Just like it's going to change when they move on to Campaign 4, and they definitely play in Daggerheart. I don't know why anyone thinks that they're not going to play in Daggerheart for Campaign 4. For some reason, people believe that, and that's crazy. But whenever they do switch, the world is going to start playing by different rules because they're using a different game system. And that's perfectly normal. And speaking of game systems, It can also be really comforting to have an official source rather than just having to adjudicate lava damage on the fly every time lava pops up in the game. After all, earlier in this episode, I just did a Type 5 about how valuable it would be for Matt to just declare a house rule for getting stunned after falling, so clearly I think there's some sort of virtue in consistent rules that you can point to. So, using official rules makes sense. And of course, I'm sure Matt felt the added pressure from the online community to get the rules right. We're going to set that aside as far as what is a useful lesson to apply to our own games, because if you forget or ignore a rule in your games and none of your players mind, then who cares what some people on the internet think, you know? But I'm aware that it was definitely a factor in this campaign, and it will impact some of Matt's future rulings in future sessions, and we'll talk about that more in the future, I'm sure. However, my real problem with Matt now using the real rules for lava has nothing to do with the fact that lava does more damage now, because I think lava should do a lot of damage. I'm not wild about referring to suggested damage as the real rules, because I think coming up with a ruling on the fly is also perfectly valid. I've also definitely felt the impulse Matt has before to treat the rules printed in the books as gospel, so I'm not going to judge this part too harshly. The problem here is that I think Matt should have declared this new rule at the top of the session, because his players are working off the assumption that lava would function very similarly to how it hurt them in previous games. You might even argue that their previous experiences with lava damage shaped their strategy around this river of lava, and what sort of risks they felt they were willing to take. And there is absolutely a way to let your players know that you're using a new rule without just saying, here are the correct rules I messed up last time. Imagine if the game had opened with Matt answering their questions about the battlefield, and then he had said this. One last thing before we roll for initiative. In the past, when you've encountered lava, I've been using the rules I had available to approximate something that felt right in the moment, but as I've been getting more familiar with the system and designing more stuff for the game, I don't feel I've quite been getting that mixture right when it comes to lava damage. In the past, the lava has been about as dangerous as acid, but it's supposed to be something a lot more significant than that. But fortunately, I found a section of the Dungeon Master's Guide that actually includes recommendations for lava damage that are more in keeping with the tone of the game. And these are the rules we're going to be using going forward because I think they do a better job of simulating the damage that the lava would actually do to you. So just be aware, if you find yourself inside the lava, it's going to pack a bit of an extra kick compared to what you've experienced before. That's it. It's that easy. I know Matt likes to play his cards very close to the chest and not pull back the curtain too far, but I also think we're in an era of the campaign where he's very quick to pick up the correct rule he feels he should be using, but he's not always great at communicating that to the players. He seems to be operating more from the mindset that because he's using the correct rule, he doesn't need to prepare his players for the change because he's doing the right thing as a game master. And if his players say, hey, what the hell? He can point to the rules and say, this is how the game works. It's how it's supposed to work. This is what we're doing now. Again, I completely get it. I've been there myself. And I'm also aware of the other factors, given he's broadcasting a show for an audience that probably has a lot of very opinionated people in it. But because his players were probably under the impression that lava worked the same way it used to, I think the beginning of the session would have been the perfect time to let them know that lava is more powerful now. Anyway, case in point, Grog takes 63 points of fire damage from being dropped into the lava. Percy's starting to really stress about how badly this fight is going. Not just because of all the damage they're taking, but also because the cops are on their way, and that situation is about to get completely out of control. That's the real problem they're going to need to solve. He keeps shooting at the Pit Fiend, but when he rolls low enough to misfire, Ripley's gun Animus deals him some psychic damage. But he actually embraces this as the perfect moment to at least try to nudge the Ifrit into not attacking them. He clutches his head and shouts that they're all going mad, the Pit Fiend is driving us mad, and we need your help! And then he runs into the mansion to take cover. The Pit Fiend lands next to the gnomes, and once again, Scanlan has a spell prepared, the same one he's tried before, Auto-Luke's Resilient Sphere, and once again it fails, and the Pit Fiend is not trapped in a sphere. So as the Pit Fiend unloads several attacks on Pike, Scanlan uses Cutting Words to make the tail attack miss.
So I'm going to Cutting Words that.
All right, what are you doing?
I'm going to sing... Your evilness is killing me, and I must confess, I want to flee, But when you see me, you lose your mind. Baby, it's a sign. Pit Fiend, baby, now you're mine.
That D12, man. You heard that shit.
However, the mace still connects, and Pike gets knocked unconscious before Matt has even finished describing all the damage she's taken.
Scanlan, you feel the blade at your side begin to vibrate at the end of your song. The myth carver that's been sitting in a thing, it begins to just shake and quiver at your side.
I'm going to draw a myth carver. Look at it. Admire it for a moment. And then turn to Pike, who's right next to me, and just healing words her with just a simple touch. Can I demonstrate on you, Talis?
Okay, fine.
Just
Hold on.
gonna do this.
All right.
Just that.
It was actually rather pleasant. I got to admit. Very soft hands.
Oh, they've never worked a day in their life. So true. 10 points of healing to Pike.
Okay, as you sing, Pike, you do not heal anything. Pike remains unconscious, bleeding.
What?
The healing does not make
She's
its way
poisoned.
through.
Sure enough, if you become poisoned by the bite of a pit fiend, you are unable to recover hit points while you're poisoned. This is the thing that Matt missed when Vex was poisoned, but he got it right this time. The party laments the fact that they didn't cast Hero's Feast because that would have protected them from the fear and the poison. Scanlan tries to dominate the pit fiend, and thanks to his cutting words, the pit fiend now has disadvantage on the save, which cancels out his natural advantage, giving them a flat roll. But the pit fiend still makes the save thanks to his plus 10 modifier. Scanlan doesn't want to leave Pike to die, but he says that he promised Kaylee he would live, so he retreats and hides around a barrel. I think a lot of us missed it at the time, but that is a pretty important signifier for where Scanlan's head is at these days. Of course, by running away, he prompts an opportunity attack, another bite, but he resists the poison, so he is not under the same affliction as Pike. Matt also once again narrates that the sword is still vibrating at his side, and that it wants to be free. Probably not important. Pike fails a death save, but she also loses a second save because the poison is still pulsing in her system. She gets a new dose of poison damage every turn, so of course, each turn, she's going to lose a save. Vex comes out of the mansion to cast protection from poison on Pike, but Matt points out that she wouldn't know that Pike was poisoned because she was in the mansion. She didn't see it happen. He allows Vex to roll an intelligence check, and she doesn't roll very high, so she does not know Pike is poisoned. So she wastes her turn on a Cure Wounds spell, and then her character sees that it has no effect and can make the connection that it's due to the bite and that there must be poison in her system. By the way, I get a lot of comments talking about how the other cast members of Critical Role metagame all the time, and moments like this are how I know that they either have a different definition of metagaming or they just don't watch the show that closely. And, you know, it's totally fine to have different definitions of what is metagaming. I actually made a whole video about that, about all the different versions of metagaming. Go check it out up here. Because based on Matt's definition of metagaming, the party is really trying not to metagame, even though it's costing them important actions they could take in combat. And at Matt's table, Matt's definition is the only one that matters. So they lose a huge advantage because they failed to heal Pike's poison because they've realized that their characters don't know what they know, which is what's wrong with Pike. Keyleth hits the Erinyes with her Sunbeam, and the Erinyes is disintegrated. Matt narrates that her armor and lasso fall to the ground, and I just really like that touch because it immediately tells the players that they can loot the body. Well, there's no body left anymore. They can loot the ash. You know what I mean. Grog takes another 74 points of lava damage at the start of his turn. He uses Stone's Endurance to reduce it to 48, which is pretty good, and then he pulls himself out of the lava. Then Grog pulls Pike into the mansion, and Vax follows and uses Lay on Hands to remove the poison from Pike. Percy feeds Pike a healing potion, bringing her back to consciousness. Then he spends an action surge to try to pull Vex into the mansion, but he only has enough movement to get her just to the door and not through the door. The movement really matters in this fight, and they're counting every square, and that's all he's got. But his goal was to try to get her away from the Pit Fiend. It's ironic that the party originally wanted to fight the Pit Fiend inside the mansion, and now it seems like the mansion is the only safe place to hide from him. The Pit Fiend splits his attacks between Vex and Scanlan. His bite knocks her unconscious, and so Matt rules that the poison damage is secondary and takes place after she goes unconscious, so she lost concentration on protection from poison, and that poison damage costs her a death save. They made a mistake here because they don't realize protection from poison is not a concentration spell, but again, it's just an honest mistake. Now, I think ruling that two sources of damage from the same attack is kind of tricky, but with poison, I do get it. It kind of is a different source of damage because you could save against it. If you think about it within the world of the game, something like the Pit Fiend's mace clearly deals bludgeoning and fire damage at the same time. When you get hit with the mace, you're also getting hit with fire. But with a poison bite, the fangs enter you, and then the venom flows out from the fangs. So I can understand the ruling that it's basically a second source of damage for the purposes of determining concentration checks and death save failures. In fact, as a player, I'd kind of want the damage to be separate when ruling on a concentration check, because I want each of those sources of damage to be as small as possible in order to keep the DC low. I personally might prefer to roll 2 easier to beat checks rather than 1 harder check. But then again, that might be stupid because more rolls means a better chance of failure because you could always roll really low. Anyway, this is kind of a loaded topic that I've actually gone back and forth on, not just as a GM in general, but when writing this script. So let me know in the comments, if an attack does 2 different kinds of damage and something like poison, do you treat them as happening one after the other for the purposes of concentration checks and death saving throws, or do they all happen at once? Let me know in the comments below. I think this is worth talking about as far as how poison and venom works. So as Vex takes those hits, Scanlan gets attacked with the tail and the mace, and despite using cutting words on the mace, he still gets hit with both.
Scanlan, you're up.
Nothing has worked on this motherfucker. Nothing.
What's your sword?
Do the sword! Yes, attack him as you run by him.
I still draw myth carver and then I put it away.
No, come on,
I don't hit
attack
things
him!
with swords.
Yeah, but it's
But he's
vibrating.
wanting to hit.
So magical.
If I did something with everything that vibrated on my body, I would be doing stuff all day long, right?
Do you pull the blade from the scabbard?
I did in the last turn. It's still out.
Right.
Yeah.
The second time, as you pull the blade out, you can see it's glowing, and it's kind of almost like a tuning fork. It's vibrating at the tip, and
Sam.
you feel like the sword is wanting to guide you.
do it.
It's your call.
I feel like this is a very strong hint from the dungeon master.
To fucking attack him.
I'm not picking up any signs from him.
I think you should just put it away.
My spike.
Maybe offer him the myth carver to leave us alone.
What do you want to do, Scanlan? Your choice entirely.
One thing that is consistently true about Matt Mercer as a game master is that he cares a lot about player agency. He really doesn't like to tell his players what to do or how they should run their characters. But sometimes there is a right answer. And as the GM, you just need to not just make it clear that there's a right answer, but that there is a powerful, compelling reason to take it. But this moment feels really unusual for Matt because it's exactly the kind of very deliberate indication that he never gives for what his players are supposed to do. But after a few very obvious hints, Scanlan heals himself and then agrees to swing the sword.
I don't know what to do now.
Roll a
Matt.
d20.
Okay, so you used your cutting words feature, so you have your attack as an advantage, right?
Yes.
So, as you kind of let the sword guide you, you feel this energy, this warmth kind of come from the blade, fill your arms, and for a second,
Oh, come on.
you watch and feel the spirit of 100 bards that have wielded this blade course through you. You see many, many foes that have fallen to its blade and those that have fallen clutching it in their side. And utilizing that, you unleash a flurry. You actually get to attack 4 times.
What?
All with advantage.
Oh, God!
You get the advantage?
Whoa.
You've had this by your side the whole time!
10 plus 9, 19.
The last one misses, but the first 3 hit. Go ahead and roll damage on those.
20, so 29 total.
29 total. Okay, so as you, as the energy courses through your body, the blade in your hand, you whoosh, whoosh. How do you want to do this?
On the pit feed? What?
Are you fucking kidding me?
I get to kill the
And the only person that saw it was fucking Keelan.
Does that seem? Yeah, this doesn't feel
Are you
fair.
serious?
very fair.
You only had 22 hit points left at
I'm fucking away from him.
As I slice, I want to slice one wing off, then the other wing off, and then as I stab him straight through the heart, I will say, "No one messes up a deal with Francois Australia."
Oh,
I cannot believe it. I cannot
God.
believe
And
it.
all of us have just been fucking running.
22 hit points.
Okay.
Yeah, but the
So-
vestige got used.
As
It woke up.
one wing is cloven off on one side, a clean cut. It kind of turns into ash and fire on one side. The other wing darts off, hits the lava, and turns to ash across the top of that. This time, as it's snarling towards you, the voice in your head saying, "I will find you." The blade right through its chest. Its jaw kind of hangs open as you say that. Its eyes go dark, and the body burns into ash and dissipates in the vicinity.
I drop to my knees,
Holy shit.
start crying, and say, "I'm so amazing."
Now, unfortunately, because of the nature of pit fiends and devils in general, if they're killed outside of the 9 hells, they actually just become reborn in the hells. So Matt does have to make the pit fiend to get the last word and make a threat against the party to help establish that and deliver the exposition. It's something they need to hear because they need to know about this. The same thing he did both times the party killed the Rakshasa. He delivered this vicious threat against them. But it also sort of takes the air out of a moment that should otherwise be a pretty triumphant victory for the party. And even if that was not the case, or you felt it was more important to deliver the exposition than to not rain on their parade, it also functionally means we are about to repeat the Rakshasa storyline again. Both of them return to the 9 hells, vowing vengeance on the party. And very minor spoilers here, but I think Matt realized this at some point after this game because the next time the party mentions the Pit Fiend as something they need to go deal with, Matt is going to intervene and find a way to drop this subplot, so we're not just repeating the Rakshasa storyline again. Of course, the other thing that makes this moment not as triumphant as perhaps it could have been is the fact that there is still a city guard watching them and getting ready to attack them.
He was an assassin sent to kill the Sultan.
Make a deception check.
Please make a deception check.
97.
Come on, come on. Come on, Bard.
This is Burt Reynolds.
32. 34.
Yes! Yes!
That's 18 plus 16, whatever that is.
34.
The Afridi stops his assault on you, like it was ready for another fireball, and as you shout this, it kind of halts. It's taken pause. You're not sure it believes you. Everything that it's seen here, probably familiar very well with the Pit Fiend and the power that it holds versus just one of the Illuminated. And you see it looking over past your shoulder, and you glance over and you see 5 more Afridi kind of walking in the direction that it may have called. It's taken pause, though.
This is sort of the downside of allowing players to make persuasion and deception checks when they don't have an action or bonus action to spend on it. Matt's been allowing that throughout the entire fight, with Vex and Percy's attempt to sway the Ifrit. And so, of course, once the Bard gets a chance to do something, it could potentially become very devastating. But it's only fair that if you're going to allow some players to do it, you need to allow them all to do it. And I do the same thing in a lot of my own games. It can lead to someone having quite a bit of outsized power if their character has incredibly high persuasion skills, so sometimes if it gets really bad or they're really abusing it, I will end up needing to say that it has to be a bonus action to try to persuade or deceive someone on your turn without spending an action on it. But generally, and this is just my perspective, it's very possible you feel differently for your own games, but I find that it is absolutely worth it to give the players cool and inventive ways to try to stop a fight without making it cost an action or a bonus action. Because allowing them to try to do it for free just gives them more opportunities for creativity. Again, if you disagree, that's perfectly fair. I think as long as you know the potential consequences of this approach, you can go into it prepared for that and decide whether or not you feel like it's worth it. Also, in the last episode, Plan A was to kill the Pit Fiend in the mansion, Plan C was to bribe the guards, but Plan B was to convince the guards that the Pit Fiend was a traitor if Plan A failed, and they wound up fighting him in the middle of the street. Things are technically going according to plan. That does not mean the plan is succeeding, but you could argue that they are kind of back on track. I think they were hoping with either Plan B or C that they would have the Ifrits fighting on their side, and we are definitely not there yet. Vex succeeds on a death save, but she still loses another save thanks to the poison pumping through her system. But thankfully, Keyleth is able to get her back into the mansion and cast protection from poison on her, and Vax uses Lay on Hands to give her a hit point, so she's conscious. Grog tries to yes-and Scanlan's bluff by saying the slaves need hosing down before he goes into the mansion, but unfortunately, he doesn't roll very well, so now the guard knows they're lying. Percy gets ready to shoot if the guard makes a move, and Pike heals Vex because none of them want to be the first one to attack the Ifrit, but they are getting ready for another throwdown if it comes to it. But thankfully, Scanlan's turn comes before the Ifrit's does.
Oh, now I got something.
That's why I'm holding my turn. If you can make this go away, I will be very happy.
This is looking very bad.
Yeah.
This is the entire city guard now coming at you.
Oh, Jeebus.
Scanlan, you're now about to be flanked by a series of Ifrit.
I take one step closer to the Ifrit, putting me within 30 feet of him.
Okay.
And I will hand cone up, and I will sing to him to try to charm him. I'll sing, "My Grog don't like you, and he likes everyone. And I should have known that you would try to run. Well, I got so caught up in my spells, I didn't see that you were trying to rat me out. But I can't do that right now." So I'm going to cast Modify Memory at 6th level.
Oh, shit!
Tricky motherfucker.
Fuck yes.
Okay.
10 minutes have not gone by. This whole thing's taken 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
This whole thing's been about, roughly, I'd say, from beginning to end, about 2 minutes, a little more than that, maybe. Just from a spatial positioning standpoint. Okay, so let's make a wisdom saving throw. Because technically you're fighting the creature because Grog made it hostile again.
Oh, shit.
It does get advantage on the saving throw.
Fuck.
That is 19. What is your spell DC again?
21.
You watch its eyes glaze over for a
MVP.
minute, and the flame kind of flickers out in its hand as it drops to the side. What are you doing? What are you modifying?
I'm telling him, you heard this fiend pledge to murder the Sultan. It's a Sultan, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You heard this fiend pledge to murder the Sultan. And you, joined with us, defeated him. You are brave. You are strong. You should tell everyone this.
As the rest of the Illuminated kind of swoop in now to catch up, weapons drawn, the one that you were talking to goes,
There is no need. We have thwarted the plot. The Sultan is safe. And these slavers here, and his paltry allies, they helped me stop it.
the rest of the Illuminated go,
Piss off, you're blowing... Stop blowing smoke. Well done.
Coming, bitch.
the Ifrit that you kind of cast on kind of looks a little deflated.
No, but seriously.
Points to the ashes there on the ground, and goes to join the rest of them, and they're kind of giving him shit. And you can tell there's like a rapport with them. They don't fully believe his story, but there doesn't appear to be any intent against you. Through a brief conversation with them, they have no reason to consider you an enemy. And you've, through a single series of lucky rolls and a perfect use of modify memory, prevented the probably 10,000-ish Illuminated that run the city. Let me look at the specific.
Wait. I just want to double check. I still have my attack though.
Oh, yeah.
You do.
Okay, so I can actually hit him and like.
Yeah, that's
okay.
a great idea. Do that.
Is it
More than that,
Everything.
we're looking at 50,000 Illuminated that run through the entirety of the
my
city of the
God.
garden.
50,000?
I have no idea how Matt was going to handle an encounter where more and more city guards start descending upon the heroes, but the point is that he was going to do it. In the previous session, he told them the consequences for fighting an ambassador from the Hells in the streets of the city, and so he essentially locked all of them into an adventure where if they were sloppy enough, they would be facing impossible odds. And obviously that's partially because they're very high-level characters and you need to throw some pretty extreme challenges their way, but we can even set that part of aside. Because really what happened is that Matt told them the stakes for failure, and then he held them to those stakes. And that's just good game mastering. Sure, not every adventure should have the potential consequence of getting torn apart by the city guards, especially at lower levels. After all, Matt's players are powerful enough that they could potentially get away from this encounter entirely. Keyleth could transport all of them back to the material plane. And I'm sure we'll do more videos in the future about what sorts of different stakes your adventures should have. But when the players get themselves into a situation where they will end up having to deal with those consequences, you have to be ready to commit to it. Anyway, thankfully it didn't come to that because they got out of the situation without fighting the Illuminated at all. And so at this point, the party loots the remaining gear left behind by the devils. The mace is too big for Grog to use, but they can show it to Juriel as proof they completed the mission, along with the metal amulet he was wearing. They also pick up the Aranez's boots and lasso, and Vex gathers up the gems she threw on the ground. They take a short rest in the mansion, and right before they take a break in real life, Matt hands Sam the new item card for Mythcarver in its awoken form. Typically, I prefer to go to a break immediately after a fight and start dealing with this sort of bookkeeping once you get back to the table, but I can also say with the experience of watching a lot of Critical Role, sometimes your players will forget about the little things like this if they don't do it before the break. Like, it's very easy to forget the fact that Vex dropped some gems on the ground. She might not remember that, and so might forget to include it if they take a break first. And honestly, pairing a real-world break with a short rest is maybe more preferable more often because it gives the players a chance to decompress and to roll for hit dice or whatever at a more relaxed pace, so that once you resume the game proper, you can skip that sort of math and get back to the more interesting part of the game. When they come back from their break, they are now able to identify the items they picked up from the Aranez's ashes. The lasso is actually a rope of entanglement, which goes to Grog, and she was also wearing boots of spider climbing, which goes to Percy. They ask the Angel Boys their names, and they are Kior and Hunan. In the last session, they said their names didn't matter, which I think is a clear indication that they were improvised NPCs and Matt didn't have a name ready, because now Matt has actually had a chance to name them. And obviously it makes sense for their characters to now trust Vox Machina. They explain that they were taken from their mother in Wildmount and have just been in captivity for a year. But then, right before the party can ask the boys about trying to get them back home, the boys voluntarily say that their mother actually sold them. This is a great choice from Matt. He mentions that they were taken from home, and he sees in his players' eyes that they are about to generate a new side quest. Two of the player characters very specifically would probably feel a very strong connection with a pair of twins who want to get back home to their single mother who they haven't seen in more than a year, so Matt immediately cuts it off. She sold us. And the party thinks, oh, okay, never mind, let's not go to Wildmount and take them home. It actually still kind of works to play off the backstory of those same two characters because now they can relate to a parent who doesn't have their best interests at heart. So now the twins can feel like they're sparing some children from suffering the same fate they did when they lived in Singorn against their will. But honestly, all those parallels feel coincidental to me. I don't think most of that was on Matt's mind in this moment. I think he just realized that he was actually accidentally inviting his party to take another side quest, and so he just shut it down really quickly and in a really smart way. Our heroes invite the Angel Boys to come back home and make a new life for themselves in Whitestone. Vax raises a glass to Scanlan and Keyleth for being the MVPs of the fight, and then they all go return to the fire giant Juriel and hand her the amulet. And Matt narrates how they watch her experience a genuine moment of peace and relief that her mission of revenge has finally been completed. This is great because this mission maybe didn't always feel amazing. An evil person took them as slaves and then told them to go kill another evil person, and because that first person is evil, she could easily betray them. But Matt humanizes her with this moment, and this also helps sell the fact that she is going to release them, because she's clearly grateful. She is moved by this. So after she releases them from servitude, she also hands over the suit of armor. Pike puts it on, and the other players text her a picture of the item card so she can just read it herself in case she doesn't really want to read it aloud on the internet. Some of the players have preferred to keep those details under their hat a little bit more because it's more fun for them. But Ashley does decide to read it aloud, and we learn that the armor was worn by a priest of Palor who fell in battle at Gordranus. It's +3 armor, and it makes her immune to fear and resistant to fire damage. If she's hit by a melee attack, the armor retaliates by dealing 2d6 fire damage. And once per dawn, if she falls unconscious, she will be surrounded by healing fire, which gives her 5 hit points and deals 66 damage to all the enemies around her. At this point, the party's ready to leave and get back to Fort Daxio, but Scanlan and Grog really want to make sure they go back and check in with Senokir and close the loop on the favor they owe him. Keyleth is the most anxious to get back to the material plane. She knows they just asked all their allies to gather there and then they left, so they won't be able to help if Thordak attacks. And so she keeps reminding them that she gave Senokir a wooden bracelet so he could track them down if they have to leave the fire plane in a hurry, which they said they might do. As far as she's concerned, Senokir knew they might have to leave really quickly, so they're under no obligation to check back in with him right now. But Scanlan and Grog point out that it would be better for them to be in control of when Senokir approaches them. The last thing they would want is for him to just drop into the middle of the Thordak fight and demand a favor. Keyleth is worried that Senokir won't let them leave the fire plane until the favor is completed, and everyone agrees that they need to be ready to tell him that they will do him the favor he asks, but it just might have to wait until their immediate business is done. But at least if they check in with him now, they'll have more control over the timeline. So they go tell Senokir they're getting ready to leave, and he says, "Oh, that's perfect. Since you're leaving, you can do me the favor."
And he pulls out this small, dark box.
Oh, God.
It's about this big.
What's in the box? What's in the box?
Here, I want you to take this and do me a favor. This will consider our debt cleared. Yes?
What is it?
What is it?
This box contains the ashes of my late wife, Zafin.
Oh.
I've kept them for years and have been intending to make a trip to Vasselheim and bury it beneath the birth heart in the abundant terrace where she once lived and toiled as a girl. I would hope that you do this, and I would consider our pact complete.
No shit.
That's it. Wow.
What a nice, sweet man.
Yeah, I think we misjudged him.
It would be an honor to complete.
Can I roll an insight check?
Can I?
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
Sure, go
It's not
ahead.
like it's gonna help.
Pike's 18 insight check doesn't give them anything besides the fact that he's a hard guy to read. Travis and Sam also roll insight checks without being asked. And Matt says,
Can't keep rolling insight until somebody gets a ridiculous number.
No, I can because it was a 4. So
Good, great.
Matt, I just rolled a 4 insight check as
I
well.
was about to say.
Okay, cool.
the party definitely has an unhealthy relationship with insight checks, and it's only going to get worse as the campaigns go on. Matt wants to avoid skill dogpiling, which is a common problem in D&D. My approach is to specifically not allow people to roll once they've seen the low results of someone else's roll. Instead, when someone asks to make an insight check, I'll say, sure, anyone who wants to, make an insight check right now. Otherwise, if you roll poorly, and someone else sees that and they want to roll themselves, it just doesn't feel good. It makes you feel like you wasted your time by rolling. If everyone who wants to roll all rolls at once, I feel like it feels a little bit less bad. However, what Matt is dealing with is also the consequence of having someone betray the party over and over again. I just talked about this in my Daredevil video, but Matt is responsible for the mistrust of his NPCs. That's on him. And to pull the curtain back a bit and give another very minor spoiler, there is no twist coming in this storyline. Nothing bad happens when they bury the box, and when asked after the campaign if there was some sort of twist, Matt denies it and confirms that Senokir was just an earnest guy. But if that was the case, he probably should have said that to Pike, considering how well she rolled with her insight check. Because even after the campaign, when Matt tells her in no uncertain terms that Senokir was just a perfectly normal wife guy, Ashley doesn't believe him. Partially because she rolled an 18, and he just said he's hard to read, so she's felt mistrustful ever since this moment. but also partially because they've been burned too many times. Now, I have two explanations for why Matt didn't reward Pike's 18 with a clear answer, and I don't know which of these was true, if either of them even was the reason why, but I could absolutely respect both of them. I think it is reasonable for Matt to have said, no, you don't know why, even on an 18, if either of these are the reason. The first explanation is that he wants Senokir to feel mysterious and hard to read, because he's trying to reinforce the idea that Senokir is a fire genasi, and their culture is very alien to the people of the material plane. But the second possible explanation is that Matt wasn't sure yet whether this was going to lead to a twist or a betrayal. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if Matt wanted to introduce this as a possible story thread, but then just like with that pit fiend, he realized this is going to complicate the campaign too much, and so he just changed his mind and decided that, no, actually this is a perfectly innocent favor. But regardless of the reason why, it's just very funny to me that the end result is that Ashley will continue to mistrust this NPC forever, even after the Dungeon Master drops all pretenses and confirms that there was nothing nefarious going on. Percy once again mentions that he wants to commission Senokir in the future, and this is when the rest of the party finally presses him on what he means. What is he asking about? He says he wanted it to be a surprise, but then he admits that once they've killed all 5 dragons, they will be some of the only people in the entire world who have done so. And so he wants to commission something that incorporates the scales of the dragons, so each one of them could have some piece of jewelry to commemorate their conquering of the Chroma Conclave. And maybe they can also make some art pieces to decorate Whitestone Castle. This is the hard thing about trying to pull off surprises as a D&D player, because at any point your fellow players can press you on the issue, and you have to decide, how important is it to keep that secret? As somebody who has tried to keep secrets from my fellow players before, I think Taliesin absolutely made the right call here by just saying, oh well, it would have been neat if this had been a surprise, but I might as well just tell you since you're directly asking me. Sometimes it's worth holding onto the secret for a little while longer, but sometimes that can just frustrate your fellow players. Honestly, there's really only one reason you should be keeping secrets from the other players: if you know it's going to make for a really satisfying surprise whenever they eventually find out. And we'll talk about this another day, I'm sure, because there are all sorts of different levels of secrets and surprises, from something like this, where your character wants to get somebody a gift, all the way to the idea that your character is literally a traitor, and there's a lot of nuance in between those extremes. But sometimes, like with any surprise you're planning for your friends, your friend might corner you and demand an answer. And sometimes it's just worth saying, oh well, that would have been neat, but here's what I was going to do. Because keeping a secret isn't as important as just keeping the vibes cool at the table. Speaking of surprises, the party uses plane shift to travel back to Fort Daxio, bringing the Angel Boys with them. And they get a bit of a rude surprise.
You open your eyes, and you're standing in the Othenden Pass once more. Though not as you left it.
Oh no.
There are billowing clouds of black in the air around you. You hear the shouts in the distance as the fort itself is currently under siege. You see what appears to be dozens of flying creatures currently swooping in and attacking. Most of the landscape here has been recently charred or burned. The bits of scrubland that you see have been burnt to small ashy cinders. Fort Daxio is in the process of falling. And
But
that's
not
where
all
we're going
the
to go
way.
ahead and pick up.
Consequences.
I don't see
Every
any.
minute
I don't see any in
counted.
this
And
in this
cows.
lesson.
Every minute counted.
Consequences and cows.
The party starts to feel like they should not have taken that extra hour to go and talk to Senokir. But honestly, Matt essentially had no choice but to do this the moment they took a long rest. I don't think 1 hour would have made the difference here. If we cast our memories back a few episodes, Matt specifically had an NPC tell them they did not have that much time from when they started sending out the messages until the dragon sent his forces here. And Vox Machina were the ones who decided to roll the dice and hope that they had at least a day or two. Actually, if you remember, they thought they had like a week. Clearly they did not. But Matt had an NPC tell them that they did not have a lot of time, so they needed to decide on their priorities. And Vox Machina felt that the suit of armor was a priority. So, once again, when you tell your players that there are consequences, you gotta be ready to back them up. And everyone in the party very clearly understands that these are the consequences of leaving to go to the fire plane. They might disagree about what specifically tipped them over the edge, but from my perspective, the moment they went to the fire plane and didn't get the job done within a single day, that's when this moment became inevitable. It cemented what Matt was going to narrate for them when they got back to Fort Daxio.
How many people did we gather?
I mean, you sent out and
No
notified
idea.
a number of
But
individuals.
it's only been a day and a half, so like nobody's gotten there yet.
I hope so. I hope we didn't put all of our eggs in one basket and then burn the
burn the
omelet.
basket.
Yeah.
Hey guys, we're here to save your fort. We're gonna just step away for 2 days. Bye.
True Vox Machina.
You're gonna do great.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
Hey.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon with episode 77, Clash at Daxio. Did Vox Machina just get all their friends killed? Is this the Thordak fight? No, and no, but it's still a really good episode, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it very soon. Hey, Oddwick. I'm here. I did the thing. Another episode of Critical Role Demystified, out at last. Fantastic. So what's next? Well, I'm going to aim to get another episode of Critical Role Demystified out in 2 weeks, as normally scheduled. Maybe something else in between, we'll see. But also, hopefully some Daggerheart videos coming soon. Ooh, anything in particular you're going to talk about? You know, I've got a few ideas, but if you're watching and there's something specific about Daggerheart you want to see me talk about, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to go back and check out some of my other recent videos, like this one here, all about a fire plane fortress I plan to run my 3rd level players through in our next session. Was this adventure inspired by the fact that I was also working on an episode of Critical Role Demystified where the players are fighting in the plane of fire? Probably, but I still think I came up with something really cool and really different and distinct. I think you're going to get a kick out of it, so go check it out now. Until next time, play fair and have fun.